The moment it happened, time seemed to freeze. One misstep, one careless adjustment during the shoot, and my most prized possession, the vintage lens I had inherited from my mentor, a lens I had hunted down for years, was gone.
Cracked.
Ruined. Irreplaceable. I sank to the floor, staring at the jagged shards and the lens mount that no longer fit, feeling a mix of disbelief and grief that I hadn't expected to feel so deeply over a piece of equipment. I had spent my life behind cameras, framing the world in perfect edges and light, capturing moments that were carefully curated, controlled. But now, the tool that had always been my conduit to perfection lay broken at my feet. And in that silence, something inside me cracked too. It wasn't just the lens. It was everything it represented. The illusion I had been nurturing for years with Ryan. The perfect relationship, the flawless career, the carefully orchestrated images of my life. All filtered, all staged, all worthy of the perfect shot. I had been chasing perfection, both in my art and in my life, and in that instant, I realized how hollow it had become. Ryan was away on tour, working with Ava, his demanding new client, leaving me alone with my thoughts. The solitude was sharp, almost painful, but it was also clarifying. Without his presence, without his charm and constant reassurance, I saw the edges of my own existence that I had been glossing over. I had been living someone else's narrative, bending my creativity and my identity to accommodate his ambitions. And now, in the wreckage of a lens I could never replace, I saw the truth. The life I was documenting wasn't mine. I picked up the broken lens, examining the twisted glass and the delicate metalwork. My fingers trembled, not just from anger, but from a strange sense of awakening. What had I been afraid of all these years? Failure? Rejection? The uncomfortable messiness of truth? I realized I had been photographing life in neat, composed frames while refusing to actually live it. In the days that followed, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had been reborn. The old Talia, the one who sought perfection, who allowed herself to be manipulated by Ryan's subtle charm and hidden ambitions, was gone. The new Talia would capture reality in all its rawness, all its imperfections. She would no longer be complicit in the illusions of others, and certainly not in Ryan's. I started looking around my apartment, at the neatly arranged photo prints, the curated props for shoots, the color-coded editing folders. Everything that had once felt like comfort now felt like a cage. I began purging, not recklessly, but deliberately, removing the items that symbolized a life built on pretense. It was exhausting and liberating at the same time, a cathartic shedding of my own illusions. And then there was Ryan. I thought about him constantly, about the way his charm had masked subtle manipulation, the way he had framed the narrative of our life together while hiding pieces of it, and now, the part that was emerging, the part with Ava. I felt a cold clarity settle over me. I needed to know the full picture. The broken lens had revealed more than technical loss. It had revealed a truth I wasn't ready to ignore. That evening, I pulled out my laptop, determined to confront the hidden side of the man I thought I knew. If Ryan had been creating a life with someone else in secret, I would find the evidence. If he had been using his work to fuel a private project that excluded me, I would expose it. My new mission wasn't just personal, it was about reclaiming my agency, my art, and my life. The lens was gone. The illusion was gone. And I, standing in the ruins of my carefully curated life, felt a strange, exhilarating freedom. I was ready to be reborn. Ryan was on tour, performing and traveling with Ava, his client who seemed to demand everything while giving nothing back. The apartment felt empty without him, yet the silence wasn't comforting. It was charged, as if the universe itself was daring me to uncover what I had suspected all along. I had been awake long into the night, thinking about the broken lens and the lens-sharp clarity it had given me. My life with Ryan wasn't what I had believed it to be. The next morning, driven by a mixture of curiosity and resolve, I accessed Ryan's production software. I knew it better than anyone. I had spent countless nights assisting him, quietly handling the technical side while he focused on his charm, his vocals, and his world. Tonight, I was using that knowledge for myself. I navigated the interface, scrolling past the usual work files, the mixes, the demos for public release, until I noticed a hidden folder labeled simply, Acoustic Demo. My pulse quickened. There was no reason he would hide a file like this from me unless it wasn't meant to be seen. That was the truth I had been seeking, the evidence that my life with Ryan had always been a constructed image, designed for appearances rather than authenticity. I downloaded the file carefully, my hands trembling with anticipation. The weight of the moment pressed down on me, as if opening this track would tear open a part of my life I had carefully hidden from myself. And yet, the thrill of truth was irresistible. I plugged in my headphones, letting the first few chords wash over me. The sound was intimate, raw, and unmistakably deliberate. It wasn't just music, it was a duet, a soft, soulful exchange between Ryan and someone else. The harmonies were beautiful, almost tender, but there was a tension in their voices that made my stomach tighten. I could feel the layers of deception behind the lyrics, the small inflections that betrayed intention. And then it happened. After the song faded, I thought it had ended, but Ryan's microphone was still live. I could hear their voices, casual and unguarded. "That song is about us, not her," Ryan said, his tone warm and almost conspiratorial. "It's time to tell Talia about the house we're getting." My chest froze. The house? My life, my profession, my career. It had all been part of a carefully orchestrated plan I hadn't even known existed. Ava's voice followed, breezy, mocking in a way that sent a chill down my spine. "Perfect. She can photograph it for us." The words hit me like shards of broken glass, sharper and more painful than the shattered lens that had started this chain of revelations. They weren't just betraying me emotionally. They were using my skills, my labor, my career, to facilitate their secret domestic plan. They had treated my profession, my life's work, as a prop in their private ambitions. I pulled off the headphones, letting the silence of my apartment wash over me. Rage, heartbreak, and clarity collided inside me. For years, I had captured beauty and authenticity for the world to admire, all while being manipulated behind the scenes. But now, armed with the truth, I had the power to reclaim not just my art, but my life. I sat down at my laptop again, thinking about my next move. If I could use Ryan's own tools and secrets against him, I could expose the misuse of resources, the manipulation, the unethical use of professional assets for personal gain. But I wouldn't do it alone. One person came to mind immediately. Dean, Ryan's older brother. Sharp, principled, and long critical of Ryan's manipulative tactics, he would know how to wield the evidence. The track wasn't just a personal betrayal, it was leverage, legal and undeniable, and Dean would understand its weight. For the first time in weeks, I felt a steady sense of purpose. The broken lens had revealed the fracture in my life. This audio track was the key to confronting it. I had been reborn, and now I was ready to act. The apartment was quiet, almost eerily so. Ryan's absence had left more than just physical space. It had left a gaping hole where truth now demanded attention. I sat cross-legged on the floor, laptop open, headphones off, replaying the audio track in my mind. Every word, every inflection, every whispered phrase felt like a confirmation that my life with Ryan had always been part of someone else's script. I didn't flinch or cry. I didn't allow myself to get lost in anger or grief. Instead, I cataloged the evidence mentally. The track itself, the metadata proving it was produced using Ryan's studio time, his engineers, the personal conversation left exposed. It was more than betrayal. It was a misuse of professional resources, an ethical violation that could not be ignored. And that meant there was a way forward. Dean. His name repeated in my mind like a lifeline. Sharp, principled, and unimpressed with Ryan's charm, he had always been a thorn in Ryan's side when it came to business ethics. If anyone could see the weight of this evidence clearly, without distraction, it was Dean. He wasn't swayed by fame, by appearances, or by charm. He was a lawyer who respected artistry, yes, but he respected honesty more. And right now, honesty was exactly what I had to leverage. I drafted an email carefully, balancing precision with urgency. The tone had to convey seriousness without emotion. Dean was practical, and any hint of dramatization would undermine the weight of the evidence. I attached the audio file, adding a clear explanation. This track was produced using company resources. The conversation after the recording confirms misuse and plans that exclude professional accountability. I am sending this because it affects the ethical integrity of his work and the studio. Before sending it, I hesitated, my finger hovering over the mouse. This was a turning point. By sending this file, I wasn't just exposing Ryan's personal betrayal. I was risking confrontation, fallout, and public exposure of professional misconduct. But the weight of the broken lens, the hidden track, and the years of deception left me no choice. I clicked send, and immediately felt a surge of liberation, a first real step toward reclaiming agency over my life and my art. Within hours, Dean replied. His response was concise, but his tone carried unmistakable intensity. I've listened. This is serious. I'll review everything and advise on next steps. Ryan's behavior has crossed lines that cannot be ignored professionally. Relief, mixed with a surge of anticipation, coursed through me. Dean's involvement meant strategy, legality, and real consequences, not just emotional catharsis. I wasn't acting in secrecy or vindictiveness. I was acting with purpose, using the evidence to hold Ryan accountable for his manipulation and misuse of company assets. That night, I sat back and reflected on the path that had led me here. The broken lens had been a trigger, a catalyst for clarity I hadn't dared to claim before. I had been chasing perfection, framing my life in filtered edges, and letting Ryan's charm and calculated gestures dictate my reality. Now, with the audio track and Dean's support, I was finally taking control. I realized that rebirth wasn't about erasing the past. It was about confronting it, understanding it, and transforming it into leverage for a future that belonged solely to me. The lens might be broken, the image of my life with Ryan shattered, but the raw truth, captured unfiltered and unapologetic, was mine to wield. And so I prepared for what came next. Legal strategy, evidence, and integrity were my allies. Ryan's secret plans, once hidden, were now exposed. And for the first time in years, I felt the unmistakable surge of empowerment that comes not from revenge, but from reclaiming your life with clarity and conviction. I had been reborn, and this time, I would capture reality as it was, messy, imperfect, and entirely my own. The days after sending the audio track to Dean were some of the longest I had ever experienced. Every notification, every email ping made my chest tighten, not with anxiety, but with anticipation. I had handed over a piece of my truth, a fragment of betrayal captured in sound, and now I waited for the machinery of justice to begin its work. Dean was meticulous. I knew he would be. He didn't rush, didn't make grandiose promises, and he certainly didn't allow sentimentality to cloud his judgment. Within 24 hours, he replied with a succinct message that left no room for doubt. He had listened, confirmed the misuse of company assets, and outlined steps to hold Ryan accountable. The phrase, misappropriation of resources for personal gain, appeared in the email, and I read it over twice, savoring its precision. I met Dean in his office later that week. The smell of leather-bound books and faint coffee filled the room, a contrast to the sterile, curated spaces Ryan favored. He didn't offer empty reassurances. He simply laid out the strategy: formal complaints, documented evidence, and legal notices that would expose Ryan's unethical conduct, his mismanagement of studio time, and the deliberate inclusion of personal endeavors into company projects. Every step was calculated, and I felt the weight of power shift subtly toward me. Watching him work was like seeing a conductor bring an orchestra to life. I had provided the instruments, the evidence, the documentation, the proof of deception, but Dean knew how to make the performance undeniable. I realized that my rebirth was not just emotional, it was tactical. I wasn't a victim. I was an agent, capable of orchestrating change, and this time, I wielded truth like a scalpel. As Dean prepared the official filings, I reflected on what had brought me here. The broken lens, a devastating but transformative loss, had shattered the perfection I had clung to for years. The audio track confirmed what my instincts had long suspected. Ryan's life with Ava wasn't just a secret affair. It was a carefully staged domestic plan, leveraging my labor, my art, and company resources for personal gain. That realization, once horrifying, had become empowering. Dean's work was thorough. Every contract, every studio session, every email thread connecting Ryan's professional resources to personal projects was documented. He explained the ripple effect. Once the complaint went public, not only would Ryan's credibility be damaged, but his production career could be severely restricted. I felt a thrill of clarity and justice. This wasn't vindictive. This was consequence. Finally, he looked at me, his eyes serious but not unkind. Talia, you've done the right thing. This isn't just about exposing Ryan. It's about holding someone accountable for ethical lapses that could have gone unnoticed. You acted with integrity and precision. For the first time in months, I allowed myself to exhale fully. I felt lighter, as though the weight of pretense, deception, and manipulation had been lifted from my shoulders. The rebirth that had begun in the shards of a lens had reached a tangible, irreversible point. I was reclaiming not just my art, but my life. In the weeks that followed, the legal filings created a ripple through Ryan's world. His reputation, carefully curated for years, faltered under scrutiny. Public statements were demanded, colleagues distanced themselves, and the industry began to see the consequences of his manipulations. And through it all, Dean kept me grounded, explaining strategy, helping navigate media attention, and ensuring that every move was principled, effective, and fair. What began as betrayal had evolved into collaboration and, unexpectedly, trust. I realized that my happy ever after wasn't in revenge. It was in integrity, in reclaiming control over my narrative, and in finding someone who valued honesty, art, and truth above pretense. The broken lens had been a beginning. The audio track, once hidden and intimate, had become my weapon and my liberation. And in the calm after the storm of revelation, I felt, for the first time in years, that I was living life unfiltered, unmanipulated, and entirely my own. The morning after the filings were submitted, the world felt both lighter and sharper. Lighter because the truth was finally in motion, sharper because I could feel the ripple of consequences stretching far beyond my apartment, far beyond Ryan, far beyond even myself. The industry buzzed quietly at first, rumors, whispers. But then, like wildfire, the truth spread. Ryan's name, once synonymous with charm and control, was now tangled with ethical violations, misappropriated resources, and personal duplicity. I watched it unfold with a mix of detachment and fascination. For months, I had been complicit in his curated image, editing out cracks and softening edges. Now, I was on the other side, watching the walls he had built around himself crumble, brick by brick, under the undeniable weight of evidence. Dean had been by my side the entire time, not just as a legal strategist, but as a steady presence. He didn't offer comfort in words or empty gestures. Instead, he provided precision, perspective, and a quiet steadiness that I hadn't realized I craved. His commitment to honesty and integrity mirrored my own newfound ethos. I felt a subtle pull toward him, something beyond gratitude or relief, a recognition that here was someone who truly saw me, understood my drive, and respected my work without manipulation. One afternoon, after a particularly tense strategy session, we took a rare break in Dean's office. The city outside the window glimmered, lights reflecting off the glass, and for a moment, the chaos of legal filings, industry gossip, and Ryan's unraveling career felt distant. "You handled this perfectly," Dean said quietly, leaning back in his chair. "It would have been easy to let emotion take over, to make mistakes in handling this. But you stayed focused, strategic, ethical." I let out a small laugh, surprising even myself. "I guess losing the lens taught me something about clarity," I said, the metaphor rolling off my tongue naturally. "You don't realize what's broken until it forces you to see the truth." Dean's gaze softened. There was a subtle intensity there, a warmth I had begun to notice in fleeting moments, brief glances that lingered longer than necessary, a hand brushing mine against a folder in passing, a quiet attentiveness that went beyond professional courtesy. "It seems like you've been reborn," he said, his voice low, not accusatory but observational. "Not just because of what Ryan did, but because you chose to take control. That's rare." I felt a flutter in my chest, a mix of pride, validation, and something I couldn't quite name. I realized I can't keep living life through someone else's frame, I admitted. I have to capture the truth, messy and imperfect, for myself first. Dean's response was a quiet smile that lingered just long enough to make the moment intimate, without words. For a brief second, the world outside, Ryan, the industry, even my own insecurities fell away. It was just us, quiet, present, and grounded in a shared understanding of truth and integrity. Over the following weeks, Ryan's career faltered more visibly. Contracts were suspended, partnerships reevaluated, and trust eroded within the industry. Yet while his world collapsed, mine stabilized. With Dean's guidance, I navigated the professional storm with focus and clarity, and in doing so, discovered an unexpected, profound connection growing between us. For the first time, I realized that my rebirth wasn't just about exposing deception, it was about recognizing who belonged in my life. Dean's presence reminded me that integrity, honesty, and shared purpose could be the foundation for something far more enduring than charm or status. As the night fell and I walked home, I felt a quiet certainty settle over me. The chaos of betrayal had revealed not only Ryan's true nature, but also the beginnings of a bond one hadn't anticipated, a bond built on trust, mutual respect, and the shared pursuit of truth. And in that certainty, I allowed myself the tiniest, most private smile. For the first time in years, I was living unfiltered, unmanipulated, and fully awake to life's possibilities. The rhythm of my days had changed completely. No longer was I simply capturing beauty through a lens or curating a life that had been carefully manufactured for appearances. Now, I was fully immersed in truth, its complexities, its discomforts, and its power. Dean had become not just an ally, but a constant presence in the battle to hold Ryan accountable. Every legal step, every piece of documentation, every carefully drafted communication was a collaborative effort, and through it, I began to recognize a trust and connection that went beyond strategy. Dean's attention to detail was astonishing. He anticipated every potential obstacle, every counterattack, every subtle attempt Ryan might make to manipulate perception. I found myself leaning on him more than I ever had expected, sometimes for legal insight, sometimes just for the steady reassurance of someone who understood the stakes and shared my commitment to integrity. It was grounding, and it made me acutely aware of how rare it was to work alongside someone who truly valued honesty over image. One evening, as we reviewed the final drafts of a complaint to the studio board, I noticed the subtle ways Dean paid attention to me, not in a patronizing or protective way, but in a way that showed genuine care and respect. He noticed the tension in my shoulders, the subtle exhaustion under my eyes, and the quiet frustration when bureaucracy slowed progress. And without being asked, he adjusted, reassured, or simply listened. I realized that my admiration for him went beyond professional respect. There was a warmth, a depth, a patience that felt like safety in a world that had been so full of manipulation and deceit. I had spent years with Ryan, swept up in charm and the illusion of intimacy, only to discover betrayal. Dean was different. With him, every connection felt earned, deliberate, and authentic. Meanwhile, Ryan's downfall continued to accelerate. Reports of misappropriated funds and studio time were circulating discreetly among colleagues, and whispers of unethical behavior began leaking into industry circles. He had underestimated the impact of exposure combined with Dean's precise legal maneuvering, and more importantly, he had underestimated me. The woman who had once framed images of life now framed facts with the same precision, exposing deception with clarity that could not be ignored. Despite the intensity of the work, there were moments of quiet that reminded me why I had chosen this path of truth. One late night, we stayed behind in the office, poring over contracts and studio records. Outside, the city lights glimmered faintly through the windows, a soft counterpoint to the harsh fluorescent glare of the office. We were exhausted, but neither of us spoke of it. Instead, we shared a sense of purpose, a silent acknowledgement of the collaboration that had grown into something deeper, something profoundly human. Dean handed me a cup of coffee, and our hands brushed. A simple contact, but one that sent a ripple of warmth through me. I met his gaze, and for a moment, the professional world fell away, leaving only two people bound by trust, by ethics, and by the rare thrill of working alongside someone whose values aligned perfectly with your own. The legal filings were reaching the final stages. Ryan's mismanagement, his hidden plans, and his misuse of resources were now fully documented, ready to be delivered to the authorities and industry boards. I felt a quiet satisfaction, not from vengeance, but from the knowledge that justice was being served through evidence, integrity, and careful strategy. And as Dean and I reviewed the last checklist together, I realized that this rebirth, the one that had begun with a broken lens and a revelation, was more than personal empowerment. It was also a lesson in connection, in trust, and in the value of partnership with someone who shared not just your goals, but your ethics, your respect, and your vision of the world. For the first time in years, I felt steady. I felt empowered. And I realized, with a thrill that made my heart beat a little faster, that life could be messy, unfiltered, and imperfect, and still, unexpectedly, entirely beautiful. The city seemed sharper now, as if every street, every building, every streetlight reflected the clarity I had been chasing for months. Ryan's misdeeds were finally coming to light. Studio managers whispered about misappropriated resources, engineers quietly admitted their surprise at being pulled into personal projects, and colleagues who had once praised Ryan's charm now looked at him with thinly veiled suspicion. The world he had carefully constructed around himself was crumbling, and I was at the center, not as a victim, but as an architect of truth. Dean and I worked side by side through it all. Our professional partnership had evolved naturally, imperceptibly, into something more intimate. It wasn't rushed or flashy. It was the quiet moments, a hand brushing mine over a folder, a lingering gaze as we analyzed contracts, a shared cup of coffee when the office lights dimmed. Each small act built trust, a connection rooted in shared principles and quiet understanding. One late evening, after a particularly intense session of filing evidence and cross-referencing studio logs, Dean leaned back in his chair, stretching, while I closed my laptop. The office was empty except for us, the hum of the city below a soft backdrop. I realized I had been holding my breath, caught between adrenaline and exhaustion. "You've handled this perfectly," Dean said, his voice low, almost confiding. "Not just the filings, but everything. You stayed calm when most people would have panicked." I smiled, feeling warmth creep into my chest. "It's easier when you have someone like you beside me," I said softly, surprising even myself with the intimacy in my tone. His eyes softened, and for a long moment, we simply looked at each other. Then, without a word, Dean reached across the desk, his fingers brushing mine again. This time, the contact lingered, deliberate, drawing me closer in a way that made my heart race. I didn't pull away. Instead, I let myself feel the warmth, the quiet electricity, the unspoken connection that had been building beneath the surface for weeks. "Do you want to step outside for a moment?" he asked, his voice rougher now, more vulnerable. I nodded, heart thudding, and we walked together to the terrace. The city stretched out below us, lights twinkling like scattered stars, the night air cool against my skin. Dean stood close enough that I could feel the warmth radiating from him. Our hands found each other naturally, fingers interlacing. "I didn't expect any of this," he admitted, his thumb brushing over my knuckles. "Not the betrayal, not the chaos, and certainly not this," he said, gesturing between us. I took a deep breath, letting the honesty of the night sink in. "Neither did I confessed. But I think we both needed it. The chaos, it brought me clarity, and you." Dean's hand cupped my face gently, his thumb tracing the line of my jaw. I'm glad you found clarity, he murmured, voice low, intimate. Then, leaning in, he kissed me. It wasn't hesitant or fleeting. It was a slow, deliberate kiss that spoke of trust, admiration, and the shared relief of surviving storms together. My hands went to his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart, matching my own. For the first time in months, I let myself sink into the moment, into the warmth of someone who respected me, saw me, and cherished honesty above all else. When we finally parted, breathing softly, I rested my forehead against his, savoring the intimacy and quiet connection that had blossomed through chaos. "We're a good team," I whispered. Dean chuckled, a low, intimate sound, before pressing his forehead to mine. "The best," he replied. And in that simple, perfect moment, I realized that my rebirth wasn't just about reclaiming my life. It was about finding someone who could walk beside me, in truth, in partnership, and now in love. The city below shimmered. Ryan's world continued to unravel, and I felt, for the first time, fully awake, alive, unbroken, and ready for whatever came next. The morning sunlight spilled through my apartment windows, soft and golden, illuminating a world that felt suddenly, irreversibly different. Ryan's name had been circulating through the industry like wildfire, but now the sparks were more than gossip. They were consequences. The filings Dean had meticulously prepared were official, and the studio board had begun its investigations. Contracts were suspended, partnerships paused, and the whispers of colleagues and engineers were no longer idle speculation. The truth had weight, and it was finally tipping the scales. I sat at my table, sipping coffee and watching the city wake, a sense of calm settling over me. It was strange how serene it felt after months of tension, betrayal, and uncertainty. The broken lens, the hidden track, the months of planning and careful strategy, all of it had brought me here. And here wasn't just safe or stable, it was alive. It was mine. Dean entered quietly, leaning against the doorframe, his expression warm and familiar. "It's almost done," he said softly. "Everything is in place. Ryan won't be able to manipulate his way out this time." I looked up at him, heart swelling with gratitude and something deeper I hadn't fully admitted to myself until now. "We did it," I said, letting the words linger. Not just legal victory. We had uncovered truth, reclaimed integrity, and taken control of a situation that had once seemed hopeless. He stepped closer, and for a moment, we were silent, the air between us charged with the quiet intimacy that had grown over weeks of collaboration. There was no rush, no need for grand gestures. Our hands found each other naturally, fingers interlacing with a familiarity that felt effortless. "I'm proud of you," Dean murmured, his voice low, almost confessional. "Not just for what you uncovered, but for the way you've carried yourself. Strong, honest, unshaken." I felt warmth flood my chest, a mixture of pride and desire, as I reached up to touch his face. "I had a good partner," I replied softly, letting my fingers trace the line of his jaw. "And someone who sees me, really sees me." His eyes softened, and he leaned down, our foreheads touching for a heartbeat. Then his lips found mine. The kiss was slow, deliberate, and unhurried, filled with the culmination of tension, trust, and the intimacy that had been quietly building for weeks. My arms wound around him, pressing closer, and I felt a release I hadn't known I needed. The betrayal, the chaos, the months of strategy, they all melted away in the warmth of his embrace. When we finally parted, our foreheads still touching, I whispered, "I think this is how life should feel. Messy, raw, but honest. And shared with someone who matters." Dean smiled, a soft, intimate curve of his lips that made my heart skip. "Exactly," he said. "And I'm not going anywhere." Outside, the city continued to stir. Ryan's career was effectively over, his manipulations exposed, and his carefully constructed facade shattered. But inside, in this quiet, golden morning, a new chapter had begun. My rebirth wasn't just about exposing truth, it was about claiming life, love, and partnership on my terms. We lingered on the terrace, hand in hand, feeling the cool morning breeze and the warmth of shared triumph. For the first time in months, I felt fully present, fully alive, and entirely at peace. The broken lens had been the spark, the hidden track had been the revelation, and Dean had become the constant, unshakable force beside me. As he pulled me closer for one last kiss before the day fully began, I realized that this was the life I had always wanted. Not perfect, not staged, but authentic, messy, and wholly my own. And in Dean's arms, I finally understood what it meant to be reborn.